Now, hello everyone. Welcome to Libraries in Response, session 137 in our series, which began in response to the pandemic in March of 2020 and has rolled on as one crisis after another has arisen. We had a social crisis immediately following the health crisis and upset a lot of people. I was just thinking about this the other day that we went from being closed, stay home, don't go out. And then there was a Floyd murder and go out and protest. And so people did that. But a lot of people resented that because they felt like, well, we should stay in unless there's a reason to go out, right? And so maybe that's so I think there's been a political backlash from that we're still going through today. Uh, and there was, of course, in the economic crisis and then the political crisis, and the climate crisis is not doing anything but getting worse. And then AI comes along as a new disruptive crisis. And we've spent a lot of time talking about that. It's been our number one topic of interest for the past 5.5 years. So we keep doing that. It is interesting. It's fascinating and alarming and all the rest of it. So we are the Gigabit Libraries Network. My name is Don Means. I'm the director here, and we produce this in partnership with IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions based in The Hague, our longtime partner in pursuit of digital equity and universal public access. And we thank them very much. This is not our speaker today. I don't know. I didn't change that slide, Allison. I apologize. We'll have to introduce you again. We'll introduce you again if you'll allow me at the end of the slides. And but let me thank our sponsors first, our supporters, the New Jersey, Texas, Washington, and Delaware state libraries are supporting us, along with Mission Telecom, our commercial sponsor, and now IFLA has come in as a sponsor, and we thank them all very much, and they allow us to keep doing these things. This is our kind of go-to image of the world that we're in, and the challenge that libraries face. All these crises, these are global crises, but libraries face crises every scale, local, personal. They walk through the door, and libraries are there. These different these different pressures are kind of topical to what we're going to talk about today. Is what are the policy responses? What's the governance appropriate to deal with these? And our governance system is really not doing well. Our health crisis was kind of a botch, and now it's not really that much better. Actually, in a lot of ways, it's worse because skepticism around official proclamations and declarations about health circumstances has become debatable. We've got large increases in cases of measles. We've got new pathogens or old pathogens recirculating and doing a lot of damage. The climate is continuing to increase pressure. The storms are getting bigger and more frequent, and we're not stepping up to this challenge. It's alarming and really not helpful as well. For example, China is making incredible strides in sustainable technologies, and they're reaping huge benefits, economic benefits, social benefits, political benefits. They're exporting these technologies around the world, and people going, yes, we can electrify without putting more carbon in the atmosphere. This is great, and we can do it fast, and we can decentralize it. So it's really excellent technology for us. The U.S. going, no, that's all bogus. We need to burn more coal, really. That's the answer. We've got a lot of coal. We should burn it. unbelievable, but that's our circumstance. And now war, when we started this in this particular image, war was, around, but it wasn't active like it is today. We got war in Gaza and Ukraine. And then just today, the administration announced that they were going to restart nuclear weapons testing. Oh, great. Well, I've been around since the end of World War II, and it's been the nuclear age my entire lifetime. And growing up, it was a real threat. I mean, it's a threat today, but it was like an active, perceived threat that we would blow ourselves up. And we did drills in the schools. You've seen all these things if you've even been around that long or have just heard about it. But the analogy I like to use with this is about having more of these things. Is you've got two guys standing in a closet up to their knees in gasoline, and one of them has 5 matches and the other one has 20 matches. So who's more powerful? Well, I would say they're kind of equally powerful, and yet we need more matches. I just don't get it. It's insane, but here we are. So these are pressures. AI, of course, being the latest thing. We talk about that a lot. What is it? How bad is it? How good is it? But these are all pressures that people are facing and disruptions that are creating, major psychological pressures on people, and they often turn to libraries for help. So we have a system that, encourages invention. Amazing numbers of inventions have come out of the U.S. and powerful business models. And so Amazon is a great example here. They made $35 billion in profit last year. Profit. That's just a lot of money. And so what do? Well, they lay off 14,000 workers. This is Cory Doctorow, been a guest of us a couple of times. And I mean, that doesn't indicate there's a lot of loyalty between the corporation and the company. I mean, companies used to have kind of a loyalty to their employees and vice versa. But I think this is a long gone era. And so now everybody is kind of a business of one, and they have to, fight for their own rights and privileges and rewards. And it's also a function, as Cory has talked about it, this process of enshittification, which he kind of premiered for us 2 years ago. Not premiered, he just announced it in late 2022 and then came on in 2023 or something like that, to lay it out. And that's this process where, and Amazon is kind of one of the leading examples, where you invest huge amounts of money to capture a market. You lower prices and you add free services, or you just undercut your competition and capture the market. That's the goal of companies, is to capture markets, to lead them or just totally monopolize them. It's their direction. So it's what they want. I've been there. That's what we try to do. And then once they have captured all the users, they turn around and leverage the users to capture the providers, in a market of all these different things. And so Amazon becomes the place where if you're selling things, you need to sell it through Amazon. So once they capture the providers, then they start to squeeze, and they start to reduce the quality of the services, or like Google, they'll just add more ads into the space for search and obscure things, and leverage information that they have taken without really sharing the fact that they're taking it and using it. And so all those activities have made those businesses worse, though tremendously profitable. And normally this would be a moment where the government would step in and intervene. And so that's the history of kind of democratic capitalism, is that you have a balance between government and private enterprise. And private enterprise is free to innovate, make profit, and all that, but up to a point. And that the government is there to regulate, to protect against dangerous practices or unfair practices like destroying your competitor through undercutting their business, the whole list of things. Well, what's happened in the US is that the corporations have become so powerful, so big and so powerful, and we have released the caps on the amount of money that you can put into politics. Thank you, Citizens United. So that now we have a government that is more or less captured by business, by corporations. And so we no longer have effective public oversight. And this is giving us the circumstance that we're living in today. I put this question to the president of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund a few weeks ago. He was our guest. I said, so has democratic capitalism failed? He goes, yes, it has. And it's just the point that we've now developed and evolved a short-term system where elections are happening more or less constantly, and politicians are only thinking about the next election, which is just months away, or corporations, which are thinking about quarterly reports, which are also just months away. So all this short-term thinking doesn't really accommodate the wider circumstance that we need to think about long-term outcomes for our actions. So it's a question we have is, well, okay, what then? China thinks long-term, but is that what we want? I don't know. Libraries reside at the intersection of these important freedoms of private inquiry and expression, and the value that we put on open access to information. They're just wonderful. They're grounded in the principle that an informed, educated citizenry is key to free society. So yes, and we're going again in the opposite direction on that. So here we are at Librarians and Misinformation, and our guest is Allison Macrina. Correct? Is that Macrina? Okay. Mm-hmm. Allison is with the Library Freedom Project, and I thought I had a quote. I think I put it in the registration that I wanted to ask you about to kind of kick it off, Allison. It was, we have gone from a crisis of access to a crisis of trust, was it? Something like that. Anyway, yeah. I put it, and I thought that was really good. I mean, we still have gaps in access, but we have a growing gap in trust, and trusted information, and for good reason. That I described the process of systems getting worse, services getting worse, and we're suffering from that because the profit extraction process, and just malefactors who want to just disrupt things are having their day. And so libraries are there to potentially offer if not a complete answer, at least a partial answer, because they are trusted. They're unusually highly trusted institutions that people rely on and believe in. So with that kind of longer introduction, I will introduce Allison. Again, I apologize for the slide, Allison. I just didn't update that. I'm very sorry about it, but welcome to Libraries in Response. Please tell us about your work and what we need to do. Really, we're looking for guidance on action. So
you set up so many problems. I don't know how I will possibly address what to do about all of them, but I will do my best. I mean, I appreciate your far-reaching introduction, because I think that these are all the kinds of issues that we try to situate our work in Library Freedom Project, essentially recognizing that we're experiencing social crisis at the global scale. And that there are various forces that are worsening those crises, and that technology and the sort of scale of the political and economic power of our tech companies as one of the big reasons why we find ourselves like with these multiple intersecting crises, often referred to as the poly crisis, because there's just so many we can't even summarize them all in one breath. And so, what we do in Library Freedom Project is recognizing the scale of our social problems and the power, relative power of the library as um existing within those social problems for sure, and certainly like acted on by them, but also, as you said, highly trusted in an environment of rapidly eroding trust in both government and private entities. A space where people are allowed to and invited to um, engage their curiosity, exercise their rights to free expression, be in community with each other. They're not asked to purchase anything. There's no economic relationship other than like some of them are taxpayers, but that it's not required to pay taxes to the library to use it and visit it for its services. And so I started Library Freedom Project kind of recognizing sitting with all these various contradictions and seeing the library as a place where we could address some of them in our local communities. And so what we do in LFP is we train librarians on issues of tech justice and the sort of broader scope of things that are happening in the world. We focus on things like privacy, misinformation, um, access, surveillance. We like to call it the sort of collection of things that we work on. We like to refer to it as information democracy because we're realizing for years that we only could talk about what we were doing in terms of what we were against, you know? So, like, we're anti surveillance, we're anti censorship, we're anti all this. And that didn't feel right. You know, we wanted to have a more positive vision for our work and towards a better future because we do believe that there is something like that possible. And so we landed on information democracy because it felt like it contained both the sort of problems and solutions within it. The idea being that what we're trying to bring forward is an environment where people can get access to the information they need without threats of things like surveillance and censorship, with clear eyes about the power structures that are limiting our information environment. So, those tech platforms and tech billionaires that I mentioned already. So, like a power analysis, but also a positive vision towards the future. And what we do is we train librarians on these issues. We have an intensive training program that we run called Library Freedom Institute. We have a lot of different kind of like one-off professional development and other kinds of trainings on subjects ranging from obviously artificial intelligence to things like resisting book bans in your community. And we also do a lot of additional kind of community building. We recognize that given our world and the stress of living in an expanding competitive authoritarian regime, we need each other and we need time to build relationships and just to strategize and get to know one another. So we try to have a lot of events that librarians can come to and just be in community. And then finally, another aspect of our work is we do a lot of resource building for both librarians to learn and to share with their colleagues, but also to share with their patrons, because ultimately that's our real target audience. You know, we're training the librarians so that we can reach a broad and diverse public. So we have all kinds of resources about how to understand the impact of technology in your life, how to access the information you need, how to understand the power structures, how to do community organizing around these issues. So yeah, that's our work in a nutshell.
Great. So what are you expecting everybody to do with that?
Well, I would love for librarians to join our network in whatever form they have the capacity for. We have a bunch of options. You can get on the lowest level one is like just get on our mailing list. You can send an email to info@libraryfreedom.org. You can get on our mailing list. We do a newsletter once a month, and that has things that we're working on, events that we're putting on that you could join, things like trainings, things that we're reading, other opportunities for getting involved with our work. The next tier would be we have a Discord. So, a chat platform where we're constantly communicating with members of our community and we're working on projects together. If you have a little bit more time, you can join our Discord. You can also just send an email to info@libraryfreedom.org about that. And then within the Discord, there's opportunities for more engagement. So we have, for example, a few committees where we're collaborating with each other all the time. We have a higher ed committee that's looking at how these issues are impacting the higher ed academic library environment. We have one for youth services, so just about like young people and helping to kind of shape their lives around technology. We have a committee that's just working on AI stuff. So there are opportunities for further engagement. And then the kind of biggest ask that we have is about our intensive training program, Library Freedom Institute. The applications are open for the next round right now. You can go to libraryfreedom.org/institute and you can see the application there. I believe they're due on December 10th, something like that. There's quite a lot of time and it's a short application. And we're looking for people who want to be really engaged on these issues in their library community and be in a supportive, collaborative cohort with other library workers from around the country. We're also working on this stuff. So it's 15 weeks long. We have an in-person weekend. The cost is a sliding scale down to zero because we know that the loss of IMLS zeroed out a lot of people's professional development budgets. And that will take place, I believe we're going to start in February 2026. So we typically have one. It's a little bit more frequent than once a year, about once every 9 months or so, we do Library Freedom Institute.
Wow. So, how many have you done?
The next one coming up will be our 11th cohort. So we're
Really?
actually, it's our 10-year anniversary this year, which is,
Wow.
I know, pretty big deal. And so it's our 11th cohort next year. We have trained hundreds of librarians in this program. A lot of them have continued on as members in our organization, so collaborating with each other and working on projects. It's a really great way to turn your ideals into practice because it's just an environment of a lot of other people who are thinking about these things.
So, how did this all get started? I mean, I understand the need, but people had to take some action in the very beginning. So, what's the origin of this?
So I became a librarian in I guess I got my first library gig in maybe 2004 or so when I was still in college. And I was part of the cohort of library of people who joined the library profession because they were motivated by librarians' actions against the USA Patriot Act. So back when that was getting passed in 2001, 2002, there was, folks will recall that the environment in that time, there was not much tolerance for any kind of dissent against the Bush administration, against the impending wars, and certainly against the the passage of the USA Patriot Act. A lot of our lawmakers didn't even read it. There wasn't a lot of effort to oppose it, but librarians as a professional body opposed it. And I think that was, it's remarkable for a lot of reasons, but like it really can't be said enough like how little there was public dissent. I mean, everybody was wearing those flag pins back then. It was like you're with us or against us language. And so librarians resisting this the passage of this enormous like omnibus new law that would create all kinds of new government surveillance powers. I was very moved by that and I already was thinking, this is maybe something I would like to do with my life and it really solidified that for me. So that's how I got my start in the library world. So then I worked in libraries for years and years. I got my MLS and around, well, I guess it was the summer of 2013. I was working as a public librarian. I was living outside of Boston at the time. And the Snowden revelations about NSA government mass surveillance happened. And I became really obsessed with this story because you know, it felt like the realization of everything that we were worried about with the Patriot Act. Here it is now. It's all happening. It's much worse than anybody could have imagined. And so I followed this story very closely. And I had a bunch of friends who were working in the civil liberties field, like as lawyers and activists, people, ACLU types. And so it was just a huge part of my mental space and my conversational space, right? But I started to think about like what what about the impact on everyday people and what kind of response could we have in terms of teaching people about how this impacts their lives? Because while there was a great amount of reporting at that time on the impact of the Snowden revelations on people like journalists or like really high profile activists or people outside of the US, I felt like I wanted to see more of a conversation about the kind of everyday surveillance impacts. And so it just seemed to me that the library felt like a fairly obvious place to initiate those conversations, that libraries care about privacy, they care about free expression, they recognize the relationship between censorship, surveillance, and the ability to be able to communicate freely. And so I started to offer a training program for the public that was just like a little privacy 101. And I brought in some of my friends from the ACLU and we covered a little bit of everything, the courts, some of the technology pieces, and people really loved it. And so it just kind of snowballed from there. I started to teach other librarians how to do this, and there was increasing demand and interest for that. And I learned about in the following year, 2014, I learned about some funding from the Knight Foundation that was supporting sort of like civic initiatives in libraries. I applied for it thinking it would be so great if they gave me like 20 grand for a travel budget. That would be amazing. I'll just work my library job and then I'll run this on the side. They gave me $250,000. So,
Wow.
yeah, they added a zero, that was really nice of them. And so I got this big grant, and then basically starting early 2015, that was just LFP became my job. And so we've really developed it since then into a nationwide training program with a lot more relationships beyond just the ACLU with other people working in civil rights and civil liberties. And yeah, that's the genesis of it, though.
Amazing, amazing. We also were a winner of a night grant. Only for us, they subtracted the zero.
Oh no. I hate it when they
But
do that.
no, it helped. It helped actually. We were doing it was a project around how libraries can anchor community communications networks as like a backup system in case everybody goes out. Then libraries can have a kind of a wireless community-wide network for resilience. But Knights has been really good. That's a fascinating story. And so you recruited people to join LFP, and you've grown from there. And uh, you must have run out of that by now. You must have other sources of support.
We got some other money now, yeah. We kept getting money for our radical agenda. So yeah.
So these are mostly from foundations, nonprofits,
Private
governments.
foundations. But we received a lot of IMLS funding over the years. And of course, that is not happening anymore. And I see that someone wrote in the chat that like some
Yeah.
of that money is being dispersed. It's a little all over the place, as you know, right? That a lot of
Right.
states that are not receiving that, and some places have the funds are supposed to be encumbered. The freedom trucks are supposed to be out there. That's what the IMLS is like says that they're working on, but I don't know anyone who has seen a freedom truck. But yeah, we did not we were pursuing more IMLS funds prior to the election, and we opted to withdraw our proposal rather than try to rewrite it to fit into the language of the executive orders.
Absolutely, yeah. We've also been beneficiaries of IMLS grants, an extraordinary institution, a federal institution. I'm sure most people are aware of it, but it's really a relatively small institution, budgeted around a quarter of a billion dollars a year. The majority of that goes out through the state library agencies, who, to varying degrees, have depended upon that to the tune of a third to a half of their annual budgets, which they then use for either grants or services that the state agencies provide. And that comment was by Jen Nelson, who is the New Jersey state librarian, and making the point that well, it has not just been blown out. There's a lot of pushback on this elimination of this agency, and so it's not settled like a lot of things these days. So it's creating a certain environment of hesitancy and caution, but uh, optimism prevails. Um, you talk about the Patriot Act, and that was really a remarkable moment, of course, when uh, showing how people will panic. You know, when a big event happens, people will just toss everything out the window to be safe, they think, and they'll turn over responsibilities to some authority to keep them safe, just on the promise they'll keep them safe. And what I remember most around that time with the libraries was that the FBI under the Patriot Act would walk into a library. I can't remember, it was in Connecticut. It was somewhere in the Northeast, and went into a library and said, "Well, we would like to see all of the records you have of people who are checking out certain kinds of books. And we're really interested in people who have interest in those specific kind of topics." And the librarian said, "Well, no, we don't do that. We no." And the FBI said, "Well, yes, you do. Under the Patriot Act, you do." And they said, "No." And they said, "Well, then you're facing jail time." And librarians, being practical people, decided instead of going to jail, they would simply burn the records. Well, wasn't that brilliant? So every 30 days, they would just erase everything. You can have it. But that was before we realized that they have it instantaneously all the time anyway. But at the moment, it was a heroic step and a brilliant response to a kind of a crisis that we were in at that time, which resonates quite a bit with the one today. Um, so where I want to turn to AI, but I want to also kind of complete your history story here. And maybe you could give us some kind of highlight projects that you think are really exemplary and you would suggest people emulate.
Well, I think that the biggest thing that I would like for people to emulate, or maybe the biggest sort of general takeaway, is that you should pursue your good idea, whatever it is. That if you have something that you feel really excited about, and it's something that like you know that other people will be interested in, and you know that you have the capacity to make it take off, don't be deterred if your boss tries to tell you that it's not a good idea, because my boss was not very interested in what I was doing and didn't want it to be something that like the library made an effort towards. So I went and did it on my own. There's money out there for you, there's support out there for you. So that's just something that I want all library workers to know. Um, but in terms of big projects that we have undertaken that I feel most proud of, I mean, certainly our flagship being Library Freedom Institute is one that I feel probably the most, strongly about, that we're training people around the country, and then we have these sort of anchors of information democracy in local library communities to then train others to be supports for their patrons. And it's just getting better every time, and we have more and more people sort of learning about it through colleagues who've taken it, and it's creating a really great tight-knit community that is very, very active. Other things that I feel pretty good about. We run every 2 years. It's a kind of conference, but we call it LFP Camp, where we bring together members of our organization, but then other sort of fellow travelers in the library world to have some time together to build relationships, to share strategies, to talk about the crises as they're experiencing them in their local communities. And I feel very proud of this effort too, because this also came out of COVID era that we all wanted something more than the sort of typical conference environment. And for a lot of our community members, the typical conference environment didn't feel safe anymore. And so we wanted something where we could be outside together, where we could commune in nature. And so we're now running that camp every couple of years. Hopefully, we can start doing it once a year if we can get the money for it, if you know any funders who want to support that. And then we've just had so many projects that I feel really strongly about. One of our earliest projects was installing tour relays in public libraries. So the Tour Project has been a partner of ours for a while. They make anonymity software. People might be familiar with Tor browser. So we started an effort where we started to install some of the essential infrastructure for the Tor network in local libraries because they have a lot of, bandwidth to spare. It felt like a really good ideological fit. And then we were temporarily stymied by the local Department of Homeland Security office that tried to get our relay shut down. But we got the local community to fight back, and we got our friends in organizations like Electronic Frontier Foundation and the ACLU to support us. And we got it turned back on, but it also, I think, importantly, was a really big kind of public message about the necessity of privacy technology. And we're just always working on something cool. We did an effort with the immigrant rights organization Mi Gente a couple of years ago where we brought attention to the fact that a lot of academic library vendors have multi-million-dollar contracts with ICE. And so we initiated a campaign to both like build awareness about that, but also to try to get people to cancel their contracts. So that's an ongoing thing. A lot of libraries have canceled contracts with Thomson Reuters and LexisNexis because of those ICE contracts. And man, what else? I don't know. Everything that we do
Oh, no,
feels
that's a lot. That's extraordinary. But I'm glad you kind of brought us back to kind of the community level here. We talk about libraries a lot in general, as a species, as an institution, but where they really matter is in the local community, which they're principally funded by, which is an extraordinary thing. So they're responsive and responsible to their local communities, unlike schools, for example, which are typically responsible to the state government. And so that's a special thing, especially in this era of devolution and decentralization that allows communities to have their own, unique strategies because the communities are all different. And so that's really an important point. We have a hand raised from Mitch Shapiro. Mitch, welcome.
Hi there. I should put my hand down, but I'll lower hand. There you go. I sometimes leave it up too long. Allison, I have a question for you and really for anyone, and it relates to the term misinformation in the title and related to the work you're doing and the work that librarians do. And the specific topic talked about, you and Don talked about, after 9/11 and Patriot Act and that kind of thing. The other wave that was different in key respects for me was during COVID in terms of scientific misinformation. In other words, what is really the science and how does that filter down from, let's say, what the government says, what the research community says, what gets into the journals, and what gets in the media. And librarians, I'm one of those people, like Don and probably most people, who trust librarians. A good friend of mine is the tech director of the Lansing area library system. And I wonder how you deal with the issue of misinformation in terms of, in the scientific arena particularly, what is misinformation? I mean, there's issues about dealing with misinformation, but prior to that is the question of clarifying what is in fact misinformation. And I wonder, maybe look back on what happened during COVID and looking forward into the future, how you would see that being dealt with by the library community, and maybe any role for your organization as an activist group, one way or the other.
I mean, where to even start with mis and disinformation? I think the first thing I want to say is that it's such an enormous crisis, and one that I feel in the library world we talk about a lot, but we do not have anything like an effective or unified response about it. And part of the issue is that well, one, I think we're not really even at a place where we can define what it is. Like you said, I think that we're talking about information that's false, or intentionally misleading or whatever, but we're sort of not willing to totally reckon with that, because I think we're stuck in this tension of wanting to be the sort of viewpoint neutral community space that is supportive of everyone. And so I think in a lot of ways we're unwilling to address, like, when we're purchasing things that are filled with mis and disinformation, right? The AI issue brings up so many problems of mis and disinformation, and yet we're in this frenzy in the library world to adopt AI tools with no critical reasoning, no skepticism, no not even using our the tools that we have learned as information workers. We're not applying that kind of framework to something like AI, where it's like it's so obvious that it's needed. We're so worried about getting left behind or not being relevant to people, or God forbid, engaging in conflict, that we don't want to address these issues head on. I think that I don't know, I'm sort of rambling about this, but this is something that I care about a lot. And I think that there are quite a lot of things that have led us to this point. I mean, we're talking about the Iraq War era and the Patriot Act. I am old enough to remember the New York Times publishing disinformation about weapons of mass destruction. They sold that war to us with lies. And so, of course, we are now in an environment 20 plus years later where people don't trust any so-called legacy media. They don't trust government entities. They don't trust private entities. They only trust like the random guy on YouTube who agrees with them about the low trust environment, but is also a total charlatan. I mean, I think that we have to totally reimagine our response to these issues. I will say one more thing and then I'll stop talking, which is
Oh,
what we've done in LFP. Our approach to addressing mis and disinformation is trying to make the conversation about the tech platforms and the tech billionaires to press on the distrust that people rightly have about these people and entities, place a lot of the responsibility in their hands. That way, it's something that appeals to people across the political spectrum, right? You don't have to say, like, my politics make me agree with this or not. You can say, everyone hates Mark Zuckerberg. It's something we can all agree on. And aren't you mad that he made it so that you can't go on your social media and see and understand what's truth, that your relatives are here posting stuff that is total garbage and that is what's getting promoted? Doesn't that make you angry? I feel like that's where we can work from. But that's the best idea I've got, honestly.
well, I sympathize with that. But what do you expect to come out of that? So there's an expression, too big to fail. That came along, with the financial crisis, and Cory Doctorow modified that to too big to care.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so what? You can march in the streets.
Mhm.
The Iraq War, 20 million people would hit the streets to do not invade. It is the worst idea anybody's ever had. And the Bush administration said, well, we're happy you can do that, but we don't listen to focus groups. Okay, focus groups. And so that changed the whole political process we'd seen before, where that mattered. People going to the streets, they demanded change, and the politicians go, okay, I need to do something. Look at all those people. And after that, it was like, well, it doesn't really affect that. You can't call on other people to do things. You have to do it. That was the lesson of the 2004 election, was that you can't demand other people demand change. You have to directly get involved. You have to run for office. You have to volunteer. You have to be active in the political process if you want change to happen. And so we've seen a lot of that. We're seeing it dramatic increase in political involvement, but it hasn't really shifted the conversation. It's just kind of made everything more energized and conflicted. So it's absolutely a dilemma, but I just don't know that being angry with Zuckerberg, which is so easy, or Elon or Jeff or any of these guys, is going to affect them, because this is not how they're built. They're built to optimize their market share, their profits, and so on. And it's just going to take extraordinary market response, or some kind of financial response, or perhaps a political response. It's just hard to imagine how that's going to actually occur. But nevertheless, I think I totally agree. People have to demand a response and a corrective action, and hope that we can get that through, because right now it doesn't look very promising.
Don, can I jump back into kind of
Go ahead, Mitch.
back on what the two of you said, and it relates to AI actually, because I personally was trying to understand, going back to COVID, sort of what is the science. And so recently I've been playing with AI, like probably a lot of people. Well, what can I do with it? And so I fed it some Senate testimonies, House Senate and House testimonies, and some other things. And I said, prepare a document that summarizes that and distinguish between things that are clearly facts, in other words, facts that aren't disputable. In other words, this document was there, it was submitted, it was released. In other words, what actually happened, and then interpretations of that, and then opinions about it, and distinguish between those. And I haven't shared it with anyone yet, but it was really interesting to me, because there are things, I got the feeling that there are things that on these kind of controversial issues where people, it's very emotional, like you were saying about with 9/11, it was fear. When everyone's afraid and it's polarized, it's very hard to understand what's going on, because everyone's afraid and doesn't have the information they need. And I found the AI tool was actually very empowering and democratizing, in the sense, if I told it, be sure to do that. Of course, they make their errors and their hallucinations, but the basic thrust of it is, if another human being walked through it, it was like, oh, so that happened, and this is the interpretation of it, and we really don't know about this or that. And it was much easier. I'm hoping that it'll be easier for people on both sides of the issues, because I know on the COVID thing, I know people on both sides of the issues, anywhere from slightly polarized to extremely polarized. And I know I'm right, and I don't, I'm very angry about it one way or the other. So I think AI can be a tool that, and I would actually like to see that aspect of it become popularized, because
Interesting,
then it's
Mitch.
an empowering tool for people to do it on their own, or as a group,
Right,
or
right.
even with their librarians, with how do we do this so it's fair?
What's especially interesting is what it came up with that was indisputable. I mean, maybe gravity, but I'm not sure there's much else that we agree about. The world is actually round, at least in my opinion,
Yeah.
but not everybody shares that opinion. So we've seen just phenomenal evidence being just dismissed by large numbers of people that we would think of as factual information. Has been a central problem of
Yeah.
consensus, is we can't agree on basic facts. as
Yeah,
we
yeah, I agree.
splintered up on all these, as Alice was pointing out, all these different media channels. It's now fragmented completely. We no longer have Walter Cronkite to kind of tell us what the conventional wisdom is. We don't have that anymore. We just have lots and lots and lots of voices and channels. So this question of trust is always the one that we come back to. And that's why it keeps leading us back to the library as a really special place, a really special institution, because people, generally speaking, have high levels of trust in the library. They know that librarians do not have an ultimate agenda. They don't want anything from you. They don't want your money. They don't want your pledge of allegiance. They don't want, they just want you to get whatever you want. And so that is the most solid foundation for trust that I think anybody could have. And they have it. And that's been around for a long time. But in this environment, it seems like that's rising up, not really on its own, but as everything else sinks down, as we
Yeah,
lose
yeah.
trust in all our other institutions, the library is kind of standing taller by comparison.
Right,
So
and that's a big responsibility.
how does the library help build on that? And what does AI, which amplifies all these other issues, how does AI come into play in a way that actually addresses the issues of disinformation and misinformation? Allison, have you ever tried to kind of diagram all these sources, and kind of differentiate between intentional bad information, accidental, gossipy stuff, and just bogus things?
Yeah, we actually did something like that in early COVID, as a resource for our communities to sort of look at like where are you getting your information from, and why and how is it trustworthy. There's I think there's limited utility in efforts like that, even though we tried it, right? And I think this gets at what you asked before about, what are people supposed to do when they have this information? I think the first thing is like we I think we've learned about mis and disinfo over the years that it doesn't work just to tell people that it's incorrect. That people don't care.
Seems to work
And then
opposite.
it does the opposite, right? It makes them defensive and it erodes the trust. It makes them worried that you have an agenda or something like that, right? I also think that there's limited utility in just presenting information that can help change people's minds or make them angry, like the thing that I was saying about Zuckerberg. And I think also, even to your point, Mitch, about like pointing out what is true and false, I think that there's something that we can work from that about, but there's a missing piece. And the missing piece is we need to be teaching, need to be offering community organizing skills and tools in our library work. And so this is a big approach that we've taken in LFP. I'll give you an example. We're talking about the crisis of misinfo and we're talking about the crisis of AI. And even if there are like, some useful aspects of it that people find, I think that what we need to look at, the total picture, is that it is a hype machine with an enormous trail of destruction in its wake, and the effort in of forcing AI into every aspect of digital life is not what anyone wants or needs, and it's not ready for prime time like that anyway. And we're also now seeing the issue of data center construction, not just in this moment, but like what happens when those computers are obsolete in less than 10 years and they have to do the whole thing over again. So the environmental impacts of it, the local impacts on water and electricity are enormous. In the library world, I think our conversation about misinfo and disinfo and about the power of the tech platforms and the tech billionaires should also be combined with an effort that says, is there a data center getting built in your community? How can you be influential on resisting that effort and teaching your neighbors about why to resist it? How can you find out if it's using your water? How can you find out if that's why your electricity bill went up, etc.? I think that there are ways to channel people into action that are totally within the remit of what the library does and are related to so many things we already do, that I think this is the approach that we've tried to take in LFP, is to give people some action to step
Yeah.
into.
Great point, because that is happening. There are pushbacks on these proposed projects that are happening around as people grow more aware of the impacts and the lack of actual benefits to the community. They don't need many employees at all to run these things. Enormous, enormous facilities, and 3 people can run the thing. So it's not like a new, factory of some sort. But it is highly impacting the local community, and it's a great point, and it's a point of activism, which I think people are looking for.
You mentioned
Other,
Amazon doing the 14,000 layoffs. I mean, how are they, they're everything is going into the AI bubble. And it's like it's such an enormous part of the US economy right now that, how did I hear it described to me the other day? It's like you can't tell how bad the disease is because the cancer has taken over the whole host, and you can't, and it's not wasting away, but it's because the rest of it, you just don't see how bad it is. And that's what's happening with AI. It's so much of what we're experiencing as the US economy right now, when actually the labor market is collapsing. It's not just Amazon that did mass layoffs. Intel, UPS, Target, Novo Nordisk, all these other big ones. Anyway.
well, no, this is the wider phenomenon of automation.
Hmm.
And of course, AI is being used as a presumed automation of, certain kind of functions, but there's a lot of robotics that are actually automating manual processes that are, dreary, repetitive, debilitating kind of physical activities. We've seen that for a long time. I mean, going back to the Industrial Revolution, we saw a lot of displacement of people by they had traditional jobs and, looms and the rest of it. But we've never seen a displacement as fast and as large as what we're seeing right now. And it's so fast that society is not able to adjust. People's individual lives are not able to adjust to the speed of displacement. And so this would normally be a need for the public sector, for government to step in and ameliorate this impact, but it's not. It's just going, well, the market will take care of everything. Well, it might, but it is not. It's going to be a lot of pain, and there is a lot of pain that's happening right now, and a lot of danger that's going on. There's a group we've had on that has tried to address this issue of trust in AI, and so they have set up a foundation of institutions that will assess the application of AI in business circumstances. And they'll kind of like what's it called, the homemaker seal kind of thing. It's called GLIA, GLIA.net, GLIA.net, and they've got the beginnings of a foundation. They have a foundation and a consortium of interests that are looking to provide the service, but it's daunting. It's daunting. Things are moving so quickly. 14,000 people, and they're talking about another 10,000, another 30,000 on top of that. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people actually work for Amazon. It's huge. It's really, really big. So we're being overwhelmed. It's kind of resonates with the turn of the last century, or the century before last, anyway. The Gilded Age, as it were, and the robber baron era. Well, so we had a government step up. We had Teddy Roosevelt step up and say, this is bad. We need to bust these up because they are no longer competitive, and they're just colluding, and they are taking us all down. It's hard to see where it's going to come from. I think our upcoming political moment is going to tell us a lot about the outlook for the U.S. system. which I've traveled a lot in China, or I did, and in those days, the Chinese would say, "We're headed towards democracy. Just give us time. We have huge problems. We're a developing country. Just give us time." And around the Obama administration, when our system became obviously dysfunctional, they started saying, well, actually, why would anybody want that? we, we think that's a bad system. And they've just kept that line up ever since. And they're making a point. They're making a point about what kind of governance system actually can deal with the technologies and the economics of today. These numbers are so big, Allison. You pointed out well that it will disrupt the entire economy. The entire global economy is teetering on these presumptions about the return on investment that just seems kind of impossible to actually achieve, that they would actually get this money back they're pouring into these businesses. And so that money is I think, actual money that's coming from somewhere, and it's not going to somewhere else. And we're going to have to see how I don't think it's going to take 10 years for that to play out. I think we're talking about a few years, if
No,
not.
I really recommend Ed Zitron's newsletter.
Yes.
He's a guy who worked in PR in the tech world for years, and he's been looking specifically at the math, the economics of it. And that's his conclusion that there's no way that their inference costs are not going down. Their projected growth doesn't make any sense based on what their user base is. It's the biggest bubble that we have seen in the contemporary era. Something bad is going to happen. Maybe it's too big to fail. Maybe there'll be a government bailout for it, but there will be impacts. It's Ed Zitron, Zitron. It's called Where's Your Ed At? It's
Good.
also got a podcast.
All right. Allison, we're at the hour. So we'd like to give you an opportunity to make a final statement. Anything you'd like to share, and we'll close out.
Oh, I just think that while we're talking about very daunting problems, I feel a lot of maybe not exactly optimism, but some kind of invigoration about the level of resistance that's happening. And so just plugging another writer, an author that I really like on this, which is Brian Merchant. He wrote a book called Blood in the Machine, which is the history of the Luddites, the machine breakers, and he situates it in our current moment. I think there's a lot to learn about how we effectively resist this and sort of what's coming. So really recommend Brian Merchant. Also recommended Ed Zitron, the work of the AI Now Institute and the Distributed AI Research DARE is another good organization. So there's a lot of really cool people thinking about these problems and positioning us towards a better future.
I'd like to just add Cory Doctorow to that list.
Yeah, Cory Doctorow, great guy.
His book, Enshittification, is just being published right now, and it really diagrams a whole lot of this. So with that, we will thank Allison Macrina and hope you'll come back sometime, and wish you best of luck and good fortune with your work. It's important work. And so we'll carry on, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks so much for having me, Don. Take care, everybody.